Islamophobia Watch. I'm George, your host, and on this show, I have part 2 of my interview with an amazing woman and a hero of our movement, the counter-jihad or counter-Islamization movement, if you will. Her name is Sabaditsch-Wolff, and she lives in Austria, but she has been fighting a battle on behalf of really the people of the free world, specifically in Europe. And now she says all her efforts are pointed in the direction of the United States, helping America find her footing in this current clash of civilizations. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to share with you part 2 of the interview with Elizabeth Sabaditsch-Wolff, a free speech and anti-Sharia activist. In this current civilizational clash, it's almost like we're doing what we're doing. Like, I'm doing this and you're doing what you're doing because you've lived it. And I've been to over 60 countries around the world, so I've seen firsthand multiple times in Muslim countries, and I have seen firsthand, so no one can tell me, right? But most people can't go to 60 countries around the world. Most people cannot have lived the life you have lived. So it's almost like in the court of public opinion, the majority of just ordinary people who live in Austria, would it be, or the United States, or any other of the so-called free world countries, they are supposed to, in the court of public opinion, hear both sides, as if it were, and make up their own mind. You know, let's have the Muslim Brotherhood propagandists, you know, let him have at it. Let him go at it and have their shot at it and try to convince us. But let's have us, you know, have a fair shot at this. And then let's have the people, our lawmakers, our people who are in government, as well as ordinary people who elect these representatives, let them make up their mind. But that's not even happening. You're being silenced. And I think that is really where the actual trouble is. And you ran into some of this. So tell us a little bit more about you're warning people about Sharia, then all of a sudden you're finding yourself in the middle of a freedom of speech issue and battle. So it's like, how many battles can you wage? But tell us a little bit about that.
Well, yes, that's very true. I mean, I've always been a freedom of speech advocate, okay? But once you start criticizing Islam, or maybe not even criticizing, once you're discussing Islam and what it does to a Western society and a liberal democracy, or whatever you want to call it, then of course you immediately catch the attention of those who are totalitarian minded, whether it's in the US, the political left, the Democrats, or in Austria, or in Europe as a whole, also the political left, who are in bed with the Muslim activists, the Sharia adherent activists, whether they are Muslim or non-Muslim, it doesn't really matter. So that's what happened back in 2008 when I was asked by a right-wing political party, and let me add that I am not a member of any political party, but this party asked me to educate the public about Islam and its effect on Europe, Austria in particular. And that's what I did. And as more and more people attended my seminars, which, by the way, were fully sourced, that's very important for me to add, I attracted the political left. And it was interesting to note that it was not the Muslim groups, the Islamic faith community in Austria, which represents or purports to represent all Muslims in Austria, that attacked me. It was my own government, my own judicial system that attacked me. And my seminar was secretly recorded, and the transcript was then provided to the public prosecutor And the public prosecutor immediately pressed charges for hate speech. And during the court proceedings, the judge, at her own discretion, during the proceedings, when she realized she couldn't get me on hate speech charges, she couldn't convict me on those, she changed the charge to denigration of religious teachings. And at that point, I knew, and my lawyer also knew, that I was going to be convicted no matter what. Now, your listeners may wonder, well, what was it that she said that got her convicted? I gave a 12-hour seminar, so I said a lot of things, as you can imagine. And what ultimately got me in trouble was one of the side discussions that my listeners, the attendees, had, and where I asked a rhetorical question. We were discussing how the Islamic prophet of Muhammad married a 6-year-old and consummated the marriage when Aisha was 9 years old. And cognizant of the fact that there was already a legal proceeding against a member of parliament for calling Muhammad a pedophile, I asked the rhetorical question, if we're not allowed to call Muhammad a pedophile, what do we call this behavior, i.e. a 56-year-old marrying a 6-year-old and consummating the marriage when she was 9? And the court ultimately decided that calling Muhammad, or asking this, or questioning this behavior, was an excess of opinion. And that's what I was convicted on.
Yeah, I mean,
Denigration of religious teachings.
this is absolutely ridiculous, of course.
Yes, yes, even 10 years after, yes.
You can look at it from a legal standpoint. I'm not a lawyer per se, but I've had enough dealings with lawyers and law and prosecutors, and based on my experience as a persecuted pastor by my own government back in where I come from. So I understand how the system works, and you know, it's really sad that the United States of America, the beacon of the free world, and the countries of the free world in the last 70 years have lost the sense of freedom of speech, to where now freedom of speech is only used to defend, say, pornography or outrageous pop culture statements or something like that. But when it comes to, say, the freedom of speech, when it comes to criticizing, say, the LGBTQ agenda, and I specifically say agenda, not people who are not talking about, not abusing or offending, or not offending, I should say, not doing acts that harm people, but actually speaking about ideas, criticizing the agenda, for example, just like with Islam. I don't wish harm to any Muslim per se, right? We're not promoting violence. We're not saying, hey, do this and this. We are only saying, how can we not ask questions? How are we not allowed to even ask questions? What kind of a society, freedom, what kind of a free society is this when you can't even ask a question? You can't perform academic research. You can't, the Bible has been scrutinized and subjected to, for example, critical analysis for how many decades, and close to 200 years now, we have a history of critical analysis of the Bible. But the Quran, no such thing. I mean, we literally, every scholar that gets, absolutely, every scholar that seriously gets involved with academic research that has to do with critical analysis, did Muhammad exist? Did he not exist? Where was Mecca? Was there Mecca? All these things. Like the Danish professor Kroner, she had to move to the United States because she was threatened. She couldn't even live in her own country because she got into high academia and proving that a lot of the things that are in the Quran are complete fabrication and bogus, right? She had to flee for her life. That is what we're dealing with. We have people murdered who are in the arts, like in the Netherlands. So this is the situation, and that's really maybe the bigger story than Islam itself. Don't you think?
Well, I've come to the conclusion that is exactly the case. We have lost on so many levels, not just with respect to Islam, but on so many levels, we've lost the truth. The truth is no longer the truth. The truth is no defense. The title of my book says it all. We've lost the sense of truth, whether it has to do with LGBTQ, with Islam, with COVID. We are living a world of lies. We're living in a world of lies. And to lie has become the new norm. And trying to find the truth is what gets you in trouble. And it's baffling. It's troublesome. It's worrying me. And it's still, but at the end of the day, I still believe, when the Gospel of John says, the truth shall set you free. That's what keeps me going, even though it's very hard every single day because everything is a lie. It's so hard to be able to speak the truth because the truth is now no longer the truth. We're not being told the truth, and we're not even allowed to seek the truth. That's the main problem.
It has been said that the brightest minds are often the most depressed because the more you know, the more depressing and grim the picture.
I totally agree.
I mean, you have like a lot of philosophers and their actual life stories to show you that people who dig deeper and deeper and deeper to understand human nature, the history itself is very grim. The history of mankind is this unceasing clash between tyranny and exploitation and slavery. And we have had this an incredible, really short time when you think about it, of post-World War II opportunity for the West to flourish. Eastern Europe only the last 30 years to recover. Eastern Europe is still recovering from communism. And now we have Islam, literally Marxism again, very seriously attempting to bring us back to a more primitive form of society, a totalitarian form of society, a reign of terror and fear and cancel culture and, going to fire you from your job for what? For wrong thing. For literally my Orwellian crime of wrong think or wrong talk. And so let's go back to your case. So you were charged with the hate crime of offending or denigrating a legally recognized religion in Austria. Are you involved in any fights right now? Any battles, court battles in Europe?
No,
You're not.
After my case was ultimately decided at the European Court of Human Rights back in 2018. That was the point where I decided, or it was decided for me, my work in Europe was over. And I've now, I came to the conclusion that the only place where I could still fight was the United States. Because
hold on a second, if I can get you back. So the European Court of Human Rights ruled in favor of what the Austrian court decided.
The European Court of Human Rights ruled in favor of the Austrian court, and in its decision, the court argued that my right to freedom of speech, it weighs less than the Muslim's right not to be offended.
So if we can just park here a little bit. So if that's true, are there any similar cases in Austria or in Europe that have dealt with the same issue?
You mean all the way up to the European Court or in general?
To the European Court.
No, I'm a single. My case is unique.
So when it comes to freedom of speech and Islam in Europe today, this is the case that essentially was an opportunity for the European Court of Human Rights to stand up for either freedom of speech and say, no, there's no such thing as offending a legally recognized religion in Austria. This is freedom of speech issue, or rule in favor and uphold the Austrian court ruling and say, yes, you cannot offend a legally recognized religion in Austria.
100% correct. There have been decisions on the European Court of Human Rights level pertaining to Christianity, for instance. There was a case, if I remember correctly, in Turkey, where a Muslim was quote unquote granted freedom of speech in discussion of Islam. But I, as a non-Muslim, this case is definitely unique.
No, okay, well, so does that mean now that a Christian in Austria, the second they track somebody who is saying something denigrating to Christianity, they can take them to court or report them to the authorities?
Well, under Austrian law, of course you can do that, but it's never actionable in the sense that it will ever make it to court. And my lawyer was so optimistic about winning the case at the European Court of Human Rights, because historically the European Court of Human Rights has always defended freedom of speech. But my case
No
was
longer.
not to be defended.
No longer. I mean, after your
No
case and
longer.
this ruling, we essentially know that the freedom of speech in Europe is dead, as I see
correct.
it. And now you are using your time and resources to provide people in the United States with the resources they might need, and it might be helpful to them to see what's been going on in Europe and how lost Europe is in that regard. And hopefully we can see liberty being saved and defended and saved here in the United States. Where do you think we're at in this battle for liberty here in the United States?
Well, I mean, the United States is slipping very fast. I mean, you know that, I know that. A President Biden certainly is not helping the situation. Now, however bad the situation is in the U.S., remember one thing: you still have the Constitution. There is still the Bill of Rights. There is still the First Amendment protected by the Second Amendment, even though it's under fire. But at the end of the day, you still have freedom to defend freedom. And that's, in my opinion, the most important sentence in my message to the American people. You still have the freedom to defend freedom. We in Europe no longer have the freedom to defend freedom, because when we go to court, 99.999% of the time we will lose. In the US, that is not the case. You may lose, but you may also win. You have a fighting chance of winning the battle. You still have it, even though the situation is grim. But again, you need to fight. That's the message. Fight, fight, fight. Because after America, there's no place to go.
There isn't. I mean, there is no other country that has these stopgap measures, if you will, like a constitution and the rule of law. Yeah.
You have the gold standard of free speech. That is worldwide the gold standard. This is where we need to look for freedom. Yes,
it's funny.
Broken. The U.S. is broken, but you still have the means to do it.
It's funny you should say that because I've taken keen interest in the whole issue of the history of the U.S. Constitution and constitutions per se. And when you look at this, you realize that actually very few countries, like how it is in the United States, anybody, Joe Schmo down the street, could have an incident, something will happen, and they can file a lawsuit, and within months they can end up in the Supreme Court, right? And on the basis of the Constitution, and that's reality. That happens all the time. And so no other country, in my opinion, in the West even, has the Constitution being so applicable and such a living document, actually, and being part of the way society functions and it's organized on an ongoing basis. Most countries, most people in Western Europe have never read their Constitution. They don't care what it says. No one really cares. Everybody cares what what the law says on, say, maybe local level or maybe city level. But the Constitution, I mean, and I may be wrong, so correct me if I'm wrong, but most
No,
people
no,
in
you're
Europe
totally
just
correct.
don't really have their constitutions in high regard. Is that correct, or if I'm missing something here? I'm not
Absolutely,
sure.
absolutely. I completely agree with you. Nobody cares about the Constitution. Nowadays, at least to some degree, uh, due to the COVID restrictions and how unconstitutional they are, people there are people who are starting to realize, we have our first constitution uh, stems from 1876, when Austria was still a monarchy, and we still had an emperor actually. And 1876, 1867, forgive me, 1867. And this is the most important constitution because that's where our freedoms come from. But nobody in Austria really knows about what happened in 1867 and why the constitution, with all the liberties that are first, that first were given to us, comes from. Nobody understands it because it's not taught. It's not taught in school like I was taught the U.S. Constitution. But, another important point I'd like to make is Americans, from the time they are born, or naturalized Americans, from the time they take the oath of citizenship, freedom is in your DNA. And that's what separates us. That's what Europeans don't have freedom in their DNA. Europeans have submission in our DNA. I'm not a typical European in that I somehow was part of this DNA, even though I wasn't born in the U.S., even though I'm not a naturalized citizen. But those years that I spent in the U.S., growing up, attending school, have somehow this DNA came to me. It was part of my being, this sense of freedom. My sister, who's 2 years younger than me, didn't get that sense. She didn't get the notion of freedom. She didn't get the understanding of freedom that I have, what it means, and that freedoms are not granted by someone or something, that freedoms are inherent to us. That's what the European as a whole, the European person, doesn't understand. We never had to really fight for our freedoms. In World War II, we didn't really have to fight for it because we had Americans and others die for our freedoms. Do you really think that a European has a sense of gratefulness to those Americans who died for our liberties? Do you think anybody understands that? Do you think?
Well, I
No. The
think
answer is a straight out no.
absolutely, and I think this goes back to the European democracy paradigm that stems from the French model. That is basically the state grants that freedom
Yeah.
versus the American Jeffersonian democracy or Republican. As we say, America is not a democracy; it's a republic. But essentially, the big difference, the big divide, is that America, in its very DNA, as you call it, is acknowledges the founding fathers with profound clarity acknowledged that liberty is part of that DNA, the human DNA. But the difference is that they legislated it here in the United States. They codified it through the Constitution and affirmed it, versus in Europe, God and the Creator and these liberties being inalienable, that's just not even in the picture. You're being given some liberties by the state, and that's it. So, yeah, it's very sad. And Elizabeth, it's such a pleasure to speak with you and to hear from you and what's been going on and what's happening today. I truly hope you will be back with us here for more of what's happening in your world and in Europe and your work in the United States. Tell us, besides the book, how can people learn more about what you do? You host a weekly program on EncounterTruth.com. Is this the best place for
Yes,
people to
yes,
follow you?
yes, yes, absolutely. If people are interested in knowing more about what's going on in Europe, but also, the U.S., I always try to, on my weekly shows, I balance Europe with America because I consider myself a traveler between the two worlds. I'm very much an American, like I'm very much a European, and I understand both worlds. So, if people are interested in both worlds, not just the U.S. point of view, but also the European point of view, absolutely, they should check out my show. It's called Katie and the Wolf. I host it together with Katie Hopkins, and it's on every Thursday at 2 p.m. Central. It's a subscription-based. You have to subscribe to in order to watch my show, but I can tell you it's definitely worth it. And I would love to see you. It's an interactive program. You can actually talk to me on that program, and also with other like-minded people. So that's where people can catch me. Other than that, like I said, I've ceased all public appearances in Europe, and as soon as I'm allowed back into the U.S., of course, I will start traveling again, because I need to tell the American people not to give up and start, fighting the good fight
I
for
completely,
liberty, for
yeah, I
freedom.
completely agree with you, and I am the same. I believe that I've shifted my focus completely and entirely. I stopped traveling internationally. I've done a lot of campaigns in the past for persecuted Christians around the world, and currently the battle is here. The fight is for the soul of America and for liberty, and the clash is with the Marxist terrorist left and the Islamic terrorist jihadist global jihad complex, military complex, and that's what the clash is. So I completely concur, and I can totally understand why you would not be spending your energy and time on Europe, which seems pretty lost right now, sad to say. But maybe as we regain our footing here in the United States, then we can help bring this back to Europe. And again, as time advances, in closing, I'm probably going to split this in two parts because it's otherwise it'd be too long. But I wanted to ask you for some closing thoughts, and what would you just some quick advice or encouragement besides fight. We got that. Right, so that's great. A little bit more practical. How do you believe people should get involved locally?
Yes.
Is there an activist organization that you recommend and you think that they're doing the job, or are we still at mostly just educating and talking, and we don't really have a good, viable activist movement?
Well, for the activist movement, I'm too far removed. I have not been in the States since CPAC last year, so forgive me for not being able to answer that question. But it's important for people to get active on a local level. Take back the school boards. That's where the left has gained so much traction in the last years, and Republicans have totally ignored the school boards, the local city councils, even the local government. That's where the political left has won, and they're still very much active, and this is where people need to return. Go back to the city boards. It might sound boring. It might sound, why do we need to do that? We should elect our congressmen and senators. No, that's part of it. But the main focus should be reclaim the base and then work your way up. That's the beauty of the American system, is you start from scratch, you start from the bottom, you work your way up. That's, get active in your Republican women's clubs, and that's what you can do to save your republic. That's my message, because that's something I would love to do, but we don't do this here in Europe, in Austria. That's not the way politics works here, or the republic works here. Get active on a local level. That's my message. Get active and educate yourself. You need to. The more knowledge you get, the more arguments you have. It's important. I do it every single day. I don't talk to you, George, and say, well, I know everything. On the contrary, I am a primary school student when it comes to Marxism and socialism and communism. I consider myself knowledgeable on Islam, but communism, socialism, Marxism, Frankfurt School, that's something I have to catch up on. I am seriously a primary school student. If that's where you need to understand the thinking of the political left. That's what you need to do, and that's how I think we can win the battle. And of course, at the end of the day, America must not turn into the godless society that Europe has become. God needs to be very present in people's lives.
Yeah, I think that is the, what should I call it? The multi-level equation that we're dealing. We're dealing with the moral, postmodern condition of society, a society that has been hammering the Bible and the veracity of the Bible, and fake science that has been filling our school books and brainwashing our children for so long. We have these fake American Psychological Association and various institutions that have been completely fraudulent for decades now, putting out fake science. We have our politicians, our political class that refuses to get educated on some fundamental things that have to do with freedom of speech and the Constitution, and not to mention Islam and a terrorist left. So the task is not small, but it certainly is better when we have people like you on board. And I so much appreciate you remaining in the battle and doing what you're doing on Encounter Truth. Again, for those of you who want to follow Elizabeth, encountertruth.com. The link will be in the description of the podcast you're listening. And make sure you subscribe and get educated. Find out how you can make a difference. If you don't have an activist group, get in touch with Elizabeth through Encounter Truth, and then maybe we'll find someone through our network of contacts who will be able to help you find a way to get involved. If you're a pastor, make sure you get in touch with her. If you're just a Christian going to a church that's oblivious to those things and you want to do something, get in touch with her. There's many things that all of us can do. So hopefully this is a call to action for everyone that listens. So thanks again, Elizabeth. Great pleasure to speak with you. And I look forward to doing that again.
So much. Thank you so much for all you do. And I hope our listeners will get up and do something.
I hope so too.
For your children and for the future and for the United States, because like I said, without the U.S., there's no place to go.
Absolutely. Thanks again.
Thank you.